In the shadow of a notorious legacy, a young man steps into Westview Academy, igniting a spark that will shatter old prejudices and unveil a hidden power destined to redefine everything he thought he knew. Jalen Carter stepped off the bus into a world that seemed to pulse with secrets and promises. A world where every brick of Westview Academy in Chicago whispered tales of past glories and hidden sorrows. The sprawling campus, renowned for its academic excellence and prestigious reputation, was draped in an autumn chill that hinted at both transformation and lingering shadows. As he moved along the polished sidewalks flanked by ancient oaks, Jalen felt an inexplicable weight on his shoulders, a blend of hope, trepidation, and the subtle pressure of a legacy he never asked for. In that moment, every step he took, it was a silent defiance against a history that refused to be forgotten. His eyes, wide with a mix of wonder and uncertainty, scanned the imposing red brick facade of Westview Academy. The grand entrance, adorned with meticulously carved stone and etched with the names of distinguished alumni, beckoned him into a realm where tradition met ambition. Yet behind the shimmering promise of a fresh start lay an undercurrent of mystery, a murmur of whispers that hinted at a notorious past and an identity that could both elevate and condemn him. Jalen was not merely a new student, he was a living paradox. Born into a family marked by a name that evoked equal parts fear and fascination, he carried within him a burden of legacy. His father's shadow, a notorious figure from a world of clandestine dealings and unspoken crimes, had long been the subject of hushed conversations. Even before Jalen set foot in this hallowed institution, his name, Carter, had already stirred curiosity and caution among those who believed that some histories were too dark to be forgotten. His mother, a woman of unyielding determination and quiet grace, had fought relentlessly to offer him a chance at redemption, a future that was hers to shape, but which inevitably carried the stains of a past that refused to wash away. As he walked through the corridors on that first day, the air itself seemed charged with anticipation. Every polished surface, every echo of laughter and murmur of conversation resonated with the untold stories of those who had come before him. It was as if the very walls of Westview Academy were sentient, holding the collective memories of generations, a blend of triumphs, tragedies, and secrets that lay buried in the folds of time. For Jalen, the academy was not merely a building, it was a living tapestry of aspirations and regrets, each thread woven with care and conflict. In the midst of this imposing legacy, Jalen's presence was both an anomaly and a promise. He was the new face in a sea of tradition, a young black boy whose arrival disrupted the carefully constructed narratives of power and privilege. As he navigated the maze of hallways and classrooms, he encountered glances that were laden with curiosity, pity, and a subtle hint of disdain. Some eyes lingered too long as if trying to decipher the enigma that was Jalen Carter, while others quickly darted away, unwilling to engage with the mystery he embodied. There was a palpable tension in the air, a delicate balance between admiration and prejudice. It was a tension that spoke of unspoken rules and invisible boundaries, of a social order that had been in place long before Jalen's arrival. His every movement was observed, analyzed, and quietly judged by those who believed that legacy was a curse that could never be shed. Yet for all the uncertainty and silent scrutiny, Jalen's inner voice remained resolute. He had come to Westview Academy not to be defined by a notorious past, but to forge a future of his own making, one that would be built on courage, resilience, and the unyielding belief in his own potential. In the early hours of that day, as the sun cast long shadows across the quad, Jalen found himself drawn to a quiet corner near a centuries-old fountain. The water, clear and steady, mirrored his own inner turmoil, a mixture of hope and anxiety swirling beneath a calm exterior. Here, In the soft murmur of falling water and the rustling of leaves, he allowed himself a brief moment of introspection. He recalled his mother's gentle words from the night before, when she had told him that every new beginning was a chance to rewrite one's destiny. Your past may be a part of you, she had said, but it does not have to be your future. Those words resonated within him like a mantra, a promise that he could rise above the constraints of history and redefine who he was. As the day unfolded, the academy revealed itself in layers of complexity. In the bustling corridors, the exchange of pleasantries and guarded smiles painted a picture of unity that was only skin deep. Beneath the surface, however, lay the echoes of old biases and unspoken hierarchies. In a classroom adorned with portraits of legendary alumni and shelves filled with time-worn books, Jalen sat quietly, absorbing the lessons not just from the curriculum, but from the very ambiance of the room. His literature teacher, Miss Hart, a woman with eyes that sparkled with both wisdom and empathy, spoke passionately about the power of storytelling to transform lives. Her words, rich with metaphors and laden with the weight of experience, ignited a spark within him, a spark that promised that his own story, though fraught with obstacles, could become a tale of redemption and triumph. Throughout the morning, every interaction, every whispered remark, and every fleeting glance seemed to stitch together a tapestry of intrigue around Jalen. He encountered classmates who, despite their own guarded expressions, revealed hints of curiosity about the new arrival. Some offered polite nods, while others engaged in half-hearted greetings that barely masked their inner conflict. To some, he was a symbol of the unknown, a puzzle that challenged the status quo. To others, he was a living reminder that beneath the veneer of perfection, even the most prestigious institutions harbored secrets and scars. Yet for all the subtle cruelty and silent judgment, there was an undeniable allure to the mystery that enveloped him. Jalen's eyes, deep and thoughtful, held the promise of untold stories, stories of pain and perseverance, of battles fought in the shadows, and of the quiet courage required to face an uncertain future. The very air of Westview Academy seemed to vibrate with anticipation, as if every corner of the building was waiting to see how this new chapter in its long history would unfold. By the time noon arrived, the bustling energy of the cafeteria mirrored the complex emotions that churned within him. The space, filled with the clatter of trays and the hum of animated conversation, was both a refuge and a battleground, a place where social status was displayed as boldly as designer clothing, and where every whispered rumor could have lasting consequences. As Jalen found a seat at an isolated table in a quiet corner, he became acutely aware of the subtle dynamics at play. His presence, a quiet disruption in the carefully ordered world of Westview, was enough to set tongues wagging and minds racing with questions. Who was this new student? What did his past hold? And most importantly, what future would he carve out for himself amid such scrutiny? In that moment, the seeds of curiosity and tension began to take root among his peers. Some watched him with a mix of admiration and apprehension, sensing that there was more to him than met the eye. Others, bound by the inertia of long-held prejudices, could only offer fleeting glances filled with suspicion. Even as the chatter around him ebbed and flowed, a deeper current of unspoken emotion surged beneath the surface. A current that would eventually swell into a force capable of challenging the very foundations of Westview Academy's social order. As the final bell rang and the day drew to a close, Jalen stepped out into the fading light of an autumn afternoon. The campus, bathed in the golden glow of a setting sun, seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Each step he took resonated with the quiet determination of a young man who knew that his journey was just beginning, a journey that would force him to confront not only the legacy of his past, but also the prejudices of a world unwilling to see beyond appearances. The mysteries of Westview Academy, with its blend of grandeur and hidden scars, lay before him like an uncharted map. Every corridor, every classroom, and every whispered conversation was a piece of a puzzle waiting to be solved. And as Jalen walked through the historic archways and time-worn corridors, a single thought echoed in his mind. Here, in this place of tradition and transformation, he would discover not only who he was meant to be, but also the strength to redefine his destiny. In the quiet solitude of that evening, as he sat by a window overlooking the twinkling lights of Chicago, Jalen's thoughts turned inward. He reflected on the myriad emotions of the day, the awe of a magnificent new beginning, the sting of silent judgments, and the spark of defiance that had taken root in his heart. The city beyond his window, with its labyrinth of streets and luminous skyline, seemed to whisper promises of a future where the past was not a prison, but a stepping stone. It was a future where every challenge would be met with unwavering courage, and every scar would serve as a testament to the transformative power of resilience. Jalen's journey at Westview Academy was more than a mere transition from one chapter of life to another. It was an odyssey into the very heart of what it meant to be human, to bear the weight of history while daring to dream of a future defined by one's own choices. In that moment of profound solitude, he vowed that he would not allow the whispers of judgment or the shadows of a notorious legacy to dictate the course of his life. Instead, he would embrace every moment, the beauty, the pain, and the mystery, with a fierce determination to carve out a destiny uniquely his own. The mysteries that had surrounded him from the moment he arrived would continue to unravel with time, each secret and every whispered rumor adding layers to his unfolding story. And though the road ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, Jalen Carter knew that within him burned an indomitable light, a light capable of dispelling darkness, of transforming pain into power, and of ultimately revealing the truth of who he was meant to become. Thus began his journey, a journey of self-discovery, resilience, and quiet revolution. The legacy of the past, with all its haunting shadows, was not a chain to bind him but a challenge to overcome. And in the grand, hallowed halls of Westview Academy, beneath the ever-watchful gaze of history, Jalen Carter stepped forward into the unknown, ready to write the first stirring lines of a story that would captivate hearts, defy expectations, and leave an indelible mark on the soul of every onlooker. Every heartbeat, every whispered hope, and every tremor of fear was a prelude to the transformation that awaited him, a transformation that promised not only redemption but a rebirth of spirit, where the true measure of a person was found not in the shadows of their ancestry but in the light of their own inner strength. And as night fell over Chicago, blanketing the city in a tapestry of dreams and distant stars, Jalen's resolve shone brighter than ever, a beacon of mystery, hope, and the irresistible pull of a destiny yet to be fulfilled. At Westview Academy, the initial hope and promise of a fresh start soon gave way to a more insidious reality. In the days following his arrival, as the crisp autumn air continued to mingle with the echoes of tradition within the hallowed corridors, Jalen Carter began to sense that beneath the surface of academic excellence lay a darker undercurrent. The soft hum of conversation in the hallways was punctuated by furtive glances and hushed murmurs that carried an unmistakable tone of judgment. It was as though the very walls of the institution were steeped in the weight of unspoken histories and unyielding prejudices. And Jalen, with his enigmatic presence and legacy-laden name, had become the unwilling focal point of it all. From the moment he stepped into the bustling corridors of Westview Academy, it was evident that he was seen as an anomaly, an outsider who carried a name that evoked both fascination and fear. The casual cruelty that began to manifest was subtle at first, a sidelong glance here, a barely audible remark there. Yet, as the days unfolded, the behavior of his peers grew increasingly overt and merciless. It started with whispered comments as he passed by groups of students huddled in corners, their eyes darting in his direction as if his very presence was a disruption to a long-established order. Each time Jalen heard a stray word or caught a fleeting look, it left an indelible mark on his sensitive yet resolute heart. Among those who took a particular interest in undermining his presence was Travis Daniels, the self-assured leader of a clique that prided itself on exclusivity and unyielding social dominance. Travis, with his impeccable attire and a demeanor that exuded entitlement, made it his personal mission to remind Jalen of the legacy that preceded him. In quiet yet venomous tones, he would comment on Jalen's lineage, invoking the notorious history of his father with a derisive mixture of awe and disdain. In the crowded hallways, where laughter and conversation once felt like a symphony of youthful energy, the sound of Travis's taunts echoed like a dissonant chord that reverberated in every corner of Jalen's mind. The emotional onslaught was relentless. There were days when, as Jalen moved between classes, he could almost feel the weight of every whispered judgment pressing down on him like an invisible force. The cruelty was not confined to words alone. It seeped into the physical realm as well. On one particularly bitter morning, while making his way to a study hall, he found his belongings mysteriously scattered outside his locker, a calculated act meant to humiliate him in front of a gathering group of onlookers. The shock of seeing his carefully arranged books and notes strewn across the cold floor left him momentarily paralyzed. In that brief lapse of time, as the cruel laughter of his peers filled the corridor, a profound sense of isolation threatened to engulf him. At home, the consequences of these daily torments became more palpable. The quiet evenings in his modest apartment were no longer a respite, but a time for reeling in the emotions that had been unleashed throughout the day. His mother, who had tirelessly fought for a better life away from the shadows of a notorious past, watched with a heavy heart as her son's once bright spirit dimmed under the relentless barrage of bullying. She would find him seated at his desk late into the night, eyes red-rimmed and hands trembling as he poured his pain into the pages of a worn journal. Each entry was a raw, unfiltered testament to the internal battle that raged within him, a struggle between the desire to retreat into silence and the burning urge to stand up and fight back against the injustice. Within the walls of Westview Academy, the dynamics of power and social hierarchy were as intricate as they were unyielding. The subtle snickers and derisive glances that followed Jalen through the hallways served as constant reminders of the deep-seated biases that were woven into the fabric of the institution. In classrooms, during group projects, and even in the quiet moments of solitary study, he found that every interaction was shadowed by the lingering judgment of those who believed that his very existence was a challenge to their preconceived notions. It was as if every step he took was meticulously measured against an unspoken standard, a standard that held his family's past as an inescapable blemish on his identity. Yet, amidst the cruelty, there were fleeting moments of quiet introspection and unexpected kindness that offered glimmers of solace. In the dim light of the school library, among rows of ancient books and the soft rustle of pages, Jalen discovered a sanctuary for his wounded soul. Here, away from the prying eyes and judgmental stares, he allowed himself to be vulnerable. The library became his haven, a place where he could confront the torrent of emotions that had been unleashed by the daily onslaught. In the silent refuge of those hallowed halls, he would pore over literature that spoke of resilience, of heroes who had triumphed over insurmountable odds, and of stories that illuminated the indomitable spirit of the human heart. These moments of quiet reflection were bittersweet. While they offered a temporary reprieve from the relentless bullying, they also served as a stark reminder of the harsh reality he was forced to endure. As the weeks progressed, The bullying evolved from isolated acts of cruelty into a pervasive, systematic campaign of emotional assault. It was no longer sufficient for his tormentors to simply cast sneers or exchange mocking glances. They began to orchestrate elaborate schemes designed to strip away his dignity. In the crowded cafeteria, where the clamor of lunchtime chatter provided the perfect cover for subtle humiliations, Jalen found himself the target of cruel pranks that were as calculated as they were painful. A misplaced book here, a spilled drink there. Each act was a deliberate effort to undermine his confidence and to signal to everyone that he was an outsider who did not belong. Travis Daniels, in particular, seemed to relish every opportunity to assert his dominance. With a cold, measured cruelty, he would publicly denigrate Jalen in front of entire groups of students, his voice low and dripping with contempt as he whispered insinuations about the dark legacy of the Carter name. The impact of these public shaming moments was profound. In the face of such humiliation, Jalen's internal world became a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, an anguished blend of anger, sorrow, and a desperate yearning to be seen as more than just the sum of his family's misfortunes. Each act of bullying chipped away at his sense of self, leaving behind fragments of a young man who was determined to prove that he was more than the whispers and the shadows of his past. The emotional turmoil that engulfed Jalen was as relentless as it was all-consuming. There were nights when he would lie awake, haunted by the echoes of cruel laughter and the memory of every degrading encounter. In those sleepless hours, his mind would replay the taunts and sneers, the unyielding rejection that had become the soundtrack of his new life at Westview Academy. The loneliness was suffocating, a heavy blanket that threatened to drown the flicker of hope that still burned within him. Yet even in the darkest moments, a small ember of resistance continued to glow, a silent promise that he would not allow the cruelty of others to define his destiny. In the midst of this relentless storm of hostility, unexpected acts of kindness began to emerge. A sympathetic glance from a classmate here, a quiet word of encouragement from a teacher there. These small gestures, though few and far between, served as lifelines in a sea of indifference. One afternoon, after a particularly harsh bout of ridicule in the cafeteria, a quiet senior named Elaine approached him with a gentle smile. She offered a few kind words, acknowledging his pain and encouraging him to keep his head high. Though the encounter was brief, it planted a seed of hope in Jalen's heart, a reminder that not everyone was complicit in the cruelty that pervaded the halls of Westview. Yet, even as these moments of compassion provided fleeting relief, the overall tide of bullying continued to rise. The systematic nature of the harassment was unyielding. It extended beyond the physical spaces of the school and seeped into every facet of Jalen's life. Class discussions, once a space for free expression, became arenas where his contributions were met with skepticism and veiled ridicule. Group assignments were marred by the deliberate sidelining of his ideas, and even the simplest social interactions were fraught with tension. The very act of being seen was enough to trigger a cascade of judgment, a continuous reminder that, to many, he was a living embodiment of a tainted legacy. The internal impact of this unrelenting torment was profound. Jalen's once resilient spirit, which had burned with the promise of transformation on his first day at Westview Academy, now flickered under the weight of relentless emotional assault. Every slight, every harsh word added a layer of hurt to an already vulnerable soul. His journal, once a repository of hopeful reflections, grew heavy with the weight of sorrow and anger. In those ink-stained pages, he wrestled with feelings of inadequacy and the crushing pressure to conform to a world that seemed determined to see him fail. The pain was raw and unfiltered, a relentless reminder of the isolation he felt in a place that was supposed to be his gateway to a brighter future. Yet even as the emotional turbulence threatened to engulf him, there emerged within Jalen a quiet yet unyielding determination. The very act of enduring the daily barrage of bullying began to forge in him a sense of inner fortitude. He realized that each cruel word, each act of public humiliation, was not a measure of his worth, but a challenge to his resilience. Slowly, amidst the isolation and the pain, he began to see these trials as opportunities for growth, a chance to cultivate a strength that was not defined by external validation, but by an unshakable belief in his own potential. In the silent moments of reflection that followed each painful encounter, Jalen found solace in the small victories that punctuated his days. A fleeting smile from a stranger in the hallway, a nod of understanding from a teacher during a quiet moment in class. Each of these instances, though seemingly insignificant, reinforced the notion that there was more to life than the cruelty he faced. They were gentle reminders that amidst the darkness, there remained pockets of light waiting to be nurtured and expanded. The intensity of the bullying reached a crescendo during a particularly difficult week when a series of orchestrated pranks culminated in a public display of humiliation. On that day, as the cacophony of jeers and mocking laughter filled the corridors, Jalen felt an overwhelming surge of vulnerability. In that moment, he stood alone in the center of a storm of derision, his eyes glistening with unshed tears and his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and defiance. The sheer cruelty of it all was a stark confrontation with the harsh reality that he was perceived not as an individual, but as a symbol of a legacy he had no desire to embody. In the aftermath of that ordeal, as the echoes of ridicule slowly faded into a heavy silence, Jalen retreated into the quiet sanctuary of the library once more. There, surrounded by the enduring words of poets and philosophers, he allowed himself to process the overwhelming mix of emotions that had engulfed him. The weight of the day pressed upon him, yet within that oppressive heaviness, he discovered a flicker of clarity. He began to write fervently, pouring his pain and his longing for acceptance into each carefully chosen word. In that solitary act of expression, he found not only a release for his sorrow, but also a burgeoning sense of resolve, a determination to transform the relentless barrage of bullying into a source of personal power. Though the days that followed continued to be marred by subtle cruelties and the ever-present sting of judgment, there was a subtle shift within Jalen. The internal turmoil that had once threatened to consume him now simmered beneath a newly kindled resolve. He realized that his journey was not one of victimhood, but of transformation. A journey where every moment of pain could be reinterpreted as a step towards self-discovery and strength. The isolation he had once felt began to give way to a cautious acceptance that, while the scars of these experiences might never fully fade, they could serve as the foundation upon which he would build a resilient and authentic identity. In that crucible of relentless bullying and emotional anguish, Jalen Carter began to understand that the true measure of his worth was not dictated by the cruelty of others, but by the courage to face his pain and forge a new path forward. Each day at Westview Academy became a silent battleground, a place where the struggle for acceptance and dignity was fought not with overt rebellion, but with the quiet determination of a heart that refused to be broken. And as the weeks turned into months, the relentless onslaught of bullying gradually transformed from an unending source of despair into a crucible that tempered his spirit. In the quiet aftermath of each humiliating encounter, when the laughter subsided and the corridors fell silent, Jalen found himself gathering the scattered fragments of his self-esteem and piecing them back together with a newfound resolve. It was a slow and painful process, but with every challenge, he discovered that he was capable of rising above the weight of judgment. The echoes of cruelty, though they left their mark, also became the driving force behind his growing determination to define himself on his own terms. Within the confines of Westview Academy, where every whispered remark and furtive glance served as a constant reminder of the burdens he carried, Jalen Carter's internal landscape underwent a profound metamorphosis. The emotional turmoil that had once threatened to drown him now became the fuel for a quiet revolution, a deep, personal awakening that illuminated the path toward self-empowerment. He began to see that every moment of rejection was not a sign of his inadequacy, but an opportunity to rediscover the strength that lay dormant within him. And so, amid the relentless onslaught of bullying and the raw intensity of his emotional turmoil, Jalen Carter emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. The cruelty he endured at Westview Academy, as painful and isolating as it was, became the unlikely catalyst for a transformation that would define the rest of his journey. In the silent chambers of his heart, where each tear and every whispered insult had once threatened to shatter him, there now resided an unyielding spirit, a spirit that would carry him forward, defiant and determined, into a future of his own making. At Westview Academy, the days of quiet suffering and relentless exclusion reached an irrevocable tipping point, a moment when Jalen Carter, whose inner world had been battered by whispered insults and calculated cruelty, finally found the strength to confront the forces that had long sought to define him. One chilly afternoon, as dark clouds gathered over the Chicago skyline and the normally vibrant corridors of the academy were shrouded in a heavy anticipatory silence, Jalen sensed that the time for retreat had passed. Every painful memory, every searing word of derision had coalesced into a burning desire not merely to survive, but to reclaim his very identity. In a secluded stretch of corridor near the science wing, one that few traversed during the lull between classes, the atmosphere seemed to crackle with tension. It was here that Jalen unexpectedly encountered Travis Daniels, the embodiment of the arrogance that had tormented him since his arrival. Travis, flanked by a couple of his closest followers, emerged from around a corner with an air of condescension that was as familiar as it was despised. The usual glances that had once carried mocking amusement now felt like open challenges, and in that instant, time appeared to slow for Jalen. He stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest, not with fear, but with an intense, surging determination. Every fiber of his being trembled with the weight of accumulated hurt and the promise of transformation. The corridor, usually a place of silent judgment, now became a stage for a confrontation that was as inevitable as it was profound. Travis's voice, low and dripping with malice, broke the charged silence as he sneered, "Carter, you've been hiding behind silence for too long. Are you really that fragile? Or have you finally decided to show us what you're really made of?" In that moment, Jalen's mind raced back over the months of relentless bullying, each snide remark, every calculated act of humiliation. But rather than succumbing to the familiar impulse to shrink away, he found himself drawing deeply on an inner reservoir of strength that he had long nurtured in secret. His eyes, once clouded with uncertainty, now shone with a steely clarity. "I'm not here to prove my worth to you," he replied, his voice resonant and unwavering. "I'm here to show myself that I can rise above everything you've ever thrown at me." Those words, spoken with a clarity that cut through the murmur of the surrounding students, marked a turning point. They were not the outburst of a weak, cornered soul, but the measured declaration of a young man who had been forged in the fires of adversity. The corridor, which had borne silent witness to so many of his private agonies, now absorbed the weight of his defiant stand. In that charged space, every sound, the distant hum of a ventilation fan, the soft creak of aged lockers, the stifled gasp of a bystander, seemed to amplify the significance of what was unfolding. Travis's eyes narrowed as he took in the resolve on Jalen's face. For years, he had thrived on exploiting vulnerabilities, on using his own sense of superiority to belittle others. Yet today, confronted with the undeniable transformation of a boy he had once seen as nothing more than a symbol of a tainted legacy, Travis faltered, "You think this is some kind of challenge?" he hissed, stepping closer in a futile attempt to intimidate him. You're nothing without that family name. You're just a kid hiding behind your mother's desperate hopes. But Jalen, buoyed by the countless hours of quiet introspection and the secret strength he had gained from those solitary moments in the library and the refuge of his own writings, did not waver. His reply was measured, each word imbued with a dignity that transcended the bitterness of past rejections. My family's history does not define me, he said softly, yet with undeniable force. I define who I am with every decision I make, with every step I take, and today, I choose to stand up for myself. The words hung in the air, charged with an emotion that was palpable. For a heartbeat, even Travis's sneer faltered, as if he too was caught in the gravity of the moment. It was as if the familiar dynamics of power were momentarily suspended, leaving only the raw, unadorned truth of one young man's declaration of self-worth. The corridor's onlookers, those who had silently observed the unfolding drama, felt an unexpected stirring, a collective realization that they were witnessing not just a confrontation, but the birth of a new inner strength in someone who had been pushed to the brink. As the tension escalated, the confrontation took on an almost ritualistic quality. The voices around them softened to an eerie silence as the very air seemed to pulse with the intensity of their exchange. Jalen's calm resolve clashed with Travis's desperate need to maintain his facade of control. Every glance, every subtle shift in posture spoke volumes about the internal battle being waged between the desire to dominate and the unyielding pursuit of personal liberation. For Jalen, this was not an impulsive reaction. It was the culmination of months of soul-searching and painful growth. In the recesses of his mind, he had revisited every moment of humiliation, every instance of isolation, and instead of allowing them to shatter him, he had transformed them into stepping stones. With each oppressive comment and every calculated act of degradation, he had learned that true power was not the ability to belittle others, but the capacity to reclaim one's own narrative. And now, as he faced Travis head on, that lesson manifested in every word he spoke and every measured breath he took. In the midst of their verbal sparring, Jalen's eyes flickered with memories of quiet afternoons spent poring over literature and scribbling in his journal where he had poured out his deepest fears and hopes. Those moments of introspection had not been wasted. They had been the crucible in which his spirit was refined. The echoes of his mother's encouraging words, the gentle guidance of mentors who had seen beyond his scarred exterior, all converged in this defining encounter. They reminded him that his worth was intrinsic, not subject to the shallow evaluations of those who clung to outdated prejudices. As the confrontation wore on, the intensity of the exchange gradually shifted from raw hostility to a more nuanced understanding. The initial barrage of insults and derision began to give way to an unspoken acknowledgement that both young men were, in their own ways, prisoners of expectations. Travis, bound by the rigid hierarchy of a world that demanded cruelty to maintain power, and Jalen, long burdened by a legacy he never chose. In that charged moment, the corridor was no longer just a battleground. It became a mirror reflecting the deeper truths of identity, vulnerability, and the courage it takes to break free from the chains of the past. Jalen's steady voice resonated through the silence that followed, each word a declaration of emancipation. I refuse to be defined by fear or by the ghosts of a legacy that no longer serves me, he said, his tone both gentle and unyielding. I have spent too long living in the shadow of what was expected of me. Today, I choose to step into the light of who I truly am. The power of his words was not lost on those gathered. For a brief shining moment, the rigid structures of social dominance that had long ruled the corridors of Westview Academy seemed to tremble. The young man who had once been a quiet target of cruelty now stood as a symbol of defiance and self-determination. The silence that followed was heavy with the realization that a significant transformation was underway, not just in the heart of one individual, but in the collective spirit of an institution that had long been steeped in tradition and prejudice. Travis, his expression a turbulent mix of disbelief and reluctant recognition, finally took a step back. His eyes, once filled with unwavering arrogance, now betrayed a glimmer of uncertainty. It was as if, in that critical moment, he had come face to face with the possibility that his own strength was nothing more than an illusion built upon the subjugation of others. The unyielding gaze of Jalen Carter had shattered the veneer of invincibility that he had so carefully maintained, leaving him to grapple with a vulnerability he had never allowed himself to acknowledge. In the aftermath of that profound exchange, the corridor remained silent for what felt like an eternity. The charged energy slowly dissipated, replaced by a contemplative calm that permeated the space. Jalen's declaration had not only challenged Travis's authority, but had also ignited something within the hearts of those who had witnessed it. A quiet revolution was unfolding, one where the true measure of strength was determined not by the capacity to intimidate, but by the courage to confront one's own fears and to embrace the inherent worth of one's identity. As the echoes of the confrontation faded, Jalen found himself standing alone, his breath steady and his resolve crystallized. In that moment, he recognized that the turning point in his journey was not marked by a singular act of defiance, but by the quiet, persistent affirmation of his own self-worth. The scars of past humiliations, the sting of every harsh word had been transformed into a powerful reminder of his resilience. He had taken the first decisive step toward reclaiming his narrative and redefining his destiny. The internal victory was palpable, a profound awakening that rippled through every fiber of his being. In the solitude that followed, as he made his way toward a small window overlooking the stormy Chicago skyline, Jalen allowed himself to reflect on the monumental significance of what had just transpired. He understood that the confrontation was not merely about standing up to a bully, but about breaking free from the confines of a legacy that had sought to diminish him. It was a reclaiming of his identity, a silent revolution that resonated far beyond the immediate clash of wills. In that quiet aftermath, every memory of past pain was reinterpreted as a stepping stone toward a brighter future. The moment of confrontation had not erased the scars of the past, but it had infused them with a newfound meaning. Each wound a testament to the journey of growth, each tear a marker of the strength that had emerged in its place. Jalen Carter had discovered that the true turning point lay in the realization that his inner power was not something bestowed upon him by others, but something he had cultivated all along, hidden beneath layers of doubt and silence. As the corridor gradually filled with the murmur of returning footsteps and cautious conversation, Jalen knew that his path forward would not be free of challenges. Yet, armed with the quiet certainty of his own worth, he felt ready to face whatever trials lay ahead. The turning point had been reached not in a dramatic explosion of anger, but in a profound moment of introspection and unwavering resolve. In the midst of the oppressive weight of past injustices, a new light had been kindled, a light that would guide him through the darkest of times and lead him toward a future defined by his own choices. In that defining moment, the echoes of his voice lingered long after the confrontation had ended. They reverberated within the walls of Westview Academy, touching the hearts of those who had witnessed the courage it took for a young man to stand up against a legacy of cruelty. Jalen Carter had not only confronted the external forces of bullying, but had also, in that instant, conquered the internal demons that had long sought to imprison him. His declaration of independence, of self-empowerment, marked the beginning of a new chapter, one in which the true measure of strength was defined by the unwavering commitment to one's own truth. And so, with the storm outside slowly giving way to a tentative calm, Jalen stepped forward into the uncertain future. The turning point had been reached, and in its wake lay the promise of transformation, a promise that the scars of the past would serve not as chains, but as a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. His journey had entered a new phase, one that would lead him toward not only self-discovery, but the quiet revolution of a heart that refused to be broken. In the soft light of that transformative afternoon, as Jalen's footsteps echoed down the quiet corridor, he carried with him the unwavering belief that every challenge faced, every painful word endured, had prepared him for this moment of clarity. The confrontation had not been an end in itself, but a beginning, a spark that would ignite a profound journey of healing and empowerment. And though the road ahead would surely be fraught with further trials, he now knew that within him lay an inexhaustible well of strength waiting to be tapped with each new sunrise. Thus, in the wake of that seminal encounter, Jalen Carter embraced the truth that his worth was not measured by the cruelty of others, but by the quiet courage that had always resided within him. It was a turning point that redefined not only his own path, but also, in subtle yet enduring ways, the fabric of a community that had long been divided by shadows of judgment. And in that defining moment, a new era began, one where the power of inner strength and the dignity of self-worth would forever change the course of his destiny. At Westview Academy, after that pivotal moment of defiance in the corridor, a new chapter quietly began in Jalen Carter's life, one marked not by further confrontation, but by the deliberate pursuit of inner strength and transformation. In the days that followed, the heavy burden of past indignities and whispered insults was slowly replaced by a determined resolve to redefine himself. Jalen knew that true power did not lie solely in confronting bullies in a moment of heated passion. It resided in the quiet, persistent work of reshaping one's body, mind, and spirit. Determined to rise above the constraints of his past and the legacy that had once threatened to suffocate him, he set out on a path of disciplined training and self-improvement. The turning point had awakened in him a deep yearning for structure and purpose, a desire to reclaim the narrative of his life by cultivating physical strength and emotional resilience. It was on one brisk morning, as the chill of early spring still clung to the air, that Jalen found himself drawn to a modest building nestled in a quieter part of Chicago. The sign on the door read, Iron and Grace Martial Arts and Wrestling Center, its faded letters hinting at a storied history of transformation and perseverance. Stepping inside, Jalen was immediately enveloped by an atmosphere that was raw and unpolished, a stark contrast to the rigid formality of Westview Academy. Here, the air vibrated with the energy of people who had chosen to forge their paths through discipline and determination. Inside, he met Coach Raymond, a seasoned mentor with kind yet resolute eyes, whose presence exuded both authority and compassion. Coach Raymond had once been a celebrated wrestler, renowned for his skill and unwavering commitment to self-mastery. His own journey through hardship had instilled in him the belief that true strength was not measured by physical dominance alone, but by the ability to harness one's inner turmoil and channel it into focused purpose. When Jalen introduced himself, his voice low with uncertainty and hope intermingled, Coach Raymond simply nodded, as though he recognized the spark of potential within the young man standing before him. You have the makings of a true fighter, Jalen, he said, his voice firm but gentle. Not in the way of brute force, but in the way that comes from discipline and self-awareness. Here, you'll learn not just to fight, but to rise. Over the following weeks, Jalen immersed himself in a rigorous training regimen that tested both his physical endurance and his mental fortitude. Early mornings were spent on the wrestling mat, where each drop of sweat and every measured movement contributed to a transformation that went far beyond the superficial. Under Coach Raymond's watchful eye, Jalen learned the art of balance, timing, and precision. A series of techniques that required him to not only use his strength, but to redirect the force of an opponent's attack. Every session was a lesson in humility and perseverance. Each time he fell, he rose again, fueled by the knowledge that every bruise was a step toward becoming stronger. In the midst of his physical training, Jalen also discovered that he was not alone on this journey. He began to forge unexpected alliances with fellow trainees who had their own battles to fight. Malik, a soft-spoken but fiercely determined young man from a challenging neighborhood, quickly became both a friend and a sparring partner. Together, they pushed each other to their limits, finding in their shared struggles a camaraderie that transcended their differences. Similarly, Serena, a quiet yet unyielding spirit with an empathetic nature, offered support not only on the mat but also in moments when Jalen's doubts threatened to overwhelm him. These alliances were more than just friendships. They were the beginnings of a small, supportive community that redefined what it meant to be strong in the face of adversity. The transformation that unfolded in the training center was profound. Each grueling practice, each setback followed by an even more determined rise, instilled in Jalen a sense of purpose that he had long thought unattainable. The discipline demanded by wrestling and martial arts was not merely about physical fitness, it was a metaphor for life itself. In every match, Jalen learned to anticipate his opponent's moves, to channel his anger into calm strategy, and to find in the heat of battle a still, unshakable center. The struggles he had faced at Westview Academy, the whispered insults, the public shaming, the isolation, began to morph into a distant memory, replaced by the immediacy of each focused moment on the mat. Beyond the physical realm, Jalen's transformation extended into the depths of his character. In the quiet moments after training, as he sat on the worn wooden floors of the center, he would reflect on his progress, jotting down his thoughts in a notebook. These were not just records of his physical achievements, they were meditations on resilience, on the meaning of strength, and on the power of forging one's identity despite the weight of a notorious legacy. Coach Raymond often joined him during these reflective moments, sharing stories from his own past, a time when he, too, had struggled to overcome the expectations and judgments of others. His words resonated deeply, each anecdote a reminder that the path to self-mastery was paved with both triumphs and setbacks. Meanwhile, the impact of Jalen's transformation began to ripple outwards, subtly altering the atmosphere at Westview Academy. The once isolated corridors, heavy with the burden of tradition and prejudice, now seemed to pulse with the quiet promise of change. Some students, who had long observed Jalen from a distance with a mix of skepticism and pity, started to offer nods of acknowledgement. In classrooms, where his voice had once been drowned out by the cacophony of derision, he now contributed with a clarity and confidence that commanded respect. Teachers, too, took note of the remarkable change in the young man who had once been the subject of so much cruel scrutiny. Miss Hart, whose gentle guidance had been a beacon of hope, remarked on the transformation with quiet pride, recognizing in Jalen the emergence of a leader whose journey was just beginning. As Jalen's reputation grew, so too did the bonds of friendship and mutual support among those who had been marginalized or silenced by the prevailing social order. Informal gatherings began to form, where students from different backgrounds met to share their stories, to discuss their struggles, and to plan initiatives that would challenge the long-standing hierarchies of their school. These meetings, held in quiet corners of the library or in the soft light of after-school study sessions, became incubators for a new spirit of unity and resilience. For many, Jalen Carter had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that it was possible to rise above the weight of judgment and to forge a future defined by one's own choices rather than by the scars of the past. In these transformative moments, Jalen also discovered the power of creative expression. Inspired by his experiences on the mat and the quiet introspection that followed each training session, he began to write with a fervor that surprised even himself. His journal, once filled with the sorrow of humiliation and isolation, gradually transformed into a vibrant tapestry of reflections on identity, strength, and the beauty of overcoming adversity. His words, raw and unfiltered, resonated with those who read them, sparking conversations about the nature of courage and the importance of self-belief. It was in these written reflections that Jalen found a voice that transcended the immediate confines of his daily struggles, a voice that spoke to the universal human desire to overcome, to heal, and to rise above the challenges that life so often presents. Outside the training center, Jalen's journey continued to intersect with various facets of his life. His mother, ever the pillar of quiet strength, remained his steadfast source of encouragement. In the evenings, over modest dinners in their small apartment overlooking the busy streets of Chicago, she would listen as he recounted the day's challenges and triumphs. Her gentle words and reassuring presence provided a grounding counterpoint to the intensity of his experiences, reminding him that every step forward was a victory in itself. It was in these intimate moments of familial support that Jalen realized the full measure of what he was building, a future not defined by the cruelty of his past, but by the relentless pursuit of growth and the nurturing of bonds that transcended the scars of history. As the weeks turned into months, the transformation that began within the Iron and Grace Martial Arts and Wrestling Center extended far beyond its walls. Jalen's discipline and inner strength began to influence those around him. The collaborative spirit fostered in the center spilled over into his interactions at Westview Academy, where old divisions were slowly eroding in the wake of his quiet revolution. Classmates who had once looked upon him with suspicion now sought his counsel, intrigued by the metamorphosis that had taken place in the young man who had once been so vulnerable. The alliances forged in the crucible of training and shared struggle began to form a foundation for a broader change, a movement where the power of unity and mutual respect challenged the entrenched prejudices that had long defined the social fabric of their school. This new sense of community was not built overnight. It was the result of countless small acts of courage and understanding, a quiet affirmation that each person's story, no matter how painful, held the potential for redemption and transformation. Malik, Serena, and a growing number of peers who had experienced their own battles with exclusion and judgment began to organize informal study groups, creative workshops, and community outreach programs. These gatherings were characterized by open dialogue, heartfelt exchanges, and the mutual recognition that strength was not a solitary pursuit, but a collective endeavor. In these moments, Jalen saw reflected back to him the many faces of resilience, a mosaic of lives that had been touched by adversity and, in turn, had chosen to rise above it. Coach Raymond continued to play a pivotal role in Jalen's journey, not only as a trainer, but as a mentor who believed in the transformative power of discipline and self-awareness. Under his guidance, Jalen learned that every setback on the mat was an opportunity to refine his technique, and every defeat was a lesson in humility. The training sessions, though physically demanding and mentally exhausting, became a sanctuary where the lessons of perseverance were etched into every movement and every breath. Each practice, every time he pushed past the limits of his endurance, reaffirmed his belief that the true measure of a person's worth was found in the courage to keep moving forward despite the odds. In the midst of this intensive period of training and personal growth, Jalen began to see tangible changes, not just in his physical strength, but in his entire outlook on life. The scars of past humiliations, once the source of quiet shame and self-doubt, transformed into badges of honor that testified to his resilience. Every bruise on his skin and every drop of sweat that fell from his brow was a silent reminder that he was rebuilding himself from the inside out. The process was neither swift nor easy. It was a long, arduous journey marked by moments of frustration, self-doubt, and the ever-present echo of old wounds. Yet with every challenge he faced, Jalen discovered that the path to true strength was paved with persistence, self-compassion, and the unwavering support of those who believed in him. By now, the ripples of change emanating from the Iron and Grace Center were felt not only by Jalen, but by the entire community of Westview Academy. His transformation became a quiet beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit has the power to overcome, to evolve, and to forge new alliances that defy the weight of history. The alliances he formed with his fellow trainees and classmates became the building blocks of a larger movement, one that sought to challenge the very foundations of prejudice and exclusion. Through shared experiences and mutual support, Jalen and his new friends demonstrated that the true essence of strength lies not in isolation or dominance, but in the ability to lift each other up, to listen, and to create spaces where every voice could be heard. As the seasons changed and the harsh chill of winter gave way to the tentative warmth of spring, Jalen Carter stood as a testament to the transformative power of discipline, friendship, and self-belief. The once fragile new kid, burdened by a notorious legacy and beset by relentless cruelty, had risen above his past. His journey, marked by grueling training sessions, heartfelt conversations, and the forging of unbreakable alliances, had redefined him from within. Every day on the wrestling mat and in the quiet moments of reflection that followed, he grew not only stronger but wiser, understanding that his greatest victories were won in the stillness of self-discovery and the collective spirit of those who dared to dream of a better future. In this crucible of transformation, Jalen learned that every struggle, every scar, and every setback was an essential part of his evolution, a necessary step on the path toward becoming the person he was meant to be. And as he looked around at the supportive faces of Malik, Serena, Coach Raymond, and the many others who had joined him on this journey, he knew that his rising above was not an isolated triumph, but a shared victory that resonated throughout Westview Academy and beyond. Thus, with each passing day, Jalen Carter continued to embody the spirit of resilience. The journey of transformation and new alliances was not a destination but an ongoing process, a lifelong commitment to growth, empathy, and the unwavering belief that every challenge could be met with courage and unity. In the heart of Chicago, amidst the echoes of history and the promise of a brighter tomorrow, Jalen's story of rising above would serve as a beacon, inspiring not only himself but all who dared to believe in the power of a renewed self. On a brisk early spring afternoon at Westview Academy, the air brimmed with a palpable sense of destiny. The grand auditorium, adorned with banners celebrating unity and resilience, had become an arena for more than just ceremonial pomp. It was the stage for Jalen Carter's ultimate confrontation and self-triumph. In that charged moment, every heartbeat and every breath resonated with the culmination of his arduous journey towards self-mastery. As the event reached its zenith, an announcement stirred the room into a profound silence. A carefully orchestrated challenge of champions was about to unfold, a symbolic contest not of brute force, but of inner strength and unyielding resolve. In the center of this sacred space, two figures emerged: Jalen, whose quiet determination had been forged in the crucible of adversity, and Travis Daniels, whose reputation as an unrelenting bully now trembled under the weight of inevitable change. The match commenced with measured precision. Jalen's movements were a harmonious blend of technique and purpose, a testament to the countless hours of disciplined training at Iron and Grace Martial Arts and Wrestling Center. Every calculated maneuver was imbued with the essence of his transformation, a declaration that he was no longer defined by the cruelty of his past or the shadow of a notorious legacy. His actions spoke of quiet revolution, each gesture an affirmation that true strength lies in the power to control one's destiny. Travis, for his part, launched into the contest with a fervor born of desperation, attempting to cling to a fading illusion of dominance. His aggressive bursts were met by Jalen's calm, deliberate counters. In the fluid rhythm of their exchange, it became clear that the real battle was not between two adversaries, but within the very souls of those who had been shaped by judgment and defiance. The room, heavy with anticipation, bore witness to this silent struggle, a contest where victory was measured by self-overcoming rather than the subjugation of another. In a decisive moment that seemed to suspend time, Jalen turned Travis's aggression against him. With a swift, graceful pivot, he executed a move that left Travis unbalanced and exposed. The auditorium fell into a hush as Jalen secured his final hold, not with malice, but with a serene clarity that revealed the true nature of his triumph. His voice, steady and imbued with heartfelt conviction, broke the silence. This victory is not about defeating an enemy. It is about transcending the limitations of my past and embracing the truth of who I am. Those words, laden with raw emotion and self-realization, rippled through every heart present. In that moment, the oppressive weight of legacy and cruelty was lifted, replaced by the luminous promise of personal redemption. Travis's defiant gaze softened into a reluctant acknowledgement, while the assembled community recognized that something profound had occurred. A young man had reclaimed his narrative through the mastery of self. As the echoes of the match lingered in the hallowed hall, Jalen Carter stood as a beacon of hope and transformation. His victory, both physical and spiritual, resonated as a timeless testament to the power of resilience and the triumph of the human spirit. In that climactic confrontation, the darkness of the past yielded to a future illuminated by the light of self-determination. Jalen Carter's journey is a stirring testament to the transformative power of resilience, self-discovery, and the courage to redefine one's identity against all odds. From the moment he set foot at Westview Academy, a venerable institution in Chicago, where every stone seemed to whisper stories of glory and hidden sorrow, Jalen carried with him the heavy legacy of a notorious family history. His early days were marked by silent judgment, hushed murmurs, and the cold sting of exclusion. Yet what might have broken a lesser spirit instead ignited a quiet, unyielding determination within him. In those first uncertain days, Jalen encountered a world that was both breathtaking and brutal. The majestic halls of Westview, lined with portraits of alumni whose names glowed with historical significance, also harbored shadows of prejudice and unspoken hierarchies. Jalen was not just another student, he was a symbol, an enigma to his peers who saw him as a walking paradox. A young man burdened by a notorious past, yet brimming with potential and untapped strength. As the whispers of his family's dark legacy circulated, Jalen experienced the full spectrum of adolescent emotions, the loneliness of isolation, the sting of humiliation, and the burning desire to prove that he was more than the sum of his history. The relentless bullying he endured at Westview became both a source of pain and a catalyst for transformation. Each dismissive glance, every calculated act of cruelty, and the public shaming he suffered in the crowded corridors became a painful reminder of how the world tried to define him by his lineage. Yet, in the quiet solitude of the school library and the reflective moments spent writing in his journal, Jalen began to transform that pain into a forge for inner strength. He learned that while the external forces of judgment could leave scars, they also carried the seeds of personal growth. Every whispered insult, every act meant to diminish him, served as a stepping stone towards a deeper understanding of his own worth. The turning point in Jalen's journey came when he found the courage to confront those who had sought to break him. In a fateful encounter with Travis Daniels, A relentless bully who had long embodied the cruelty and arrogance of the established order, Jalen's quiet resolve burst forth into a powerful declaration of self-empowerment. Standing face to face with Travis in a secluded corridor, Jalen's measured words and unwavering gaze shattered the veneer of invincibility that had once defined his tormentor. In that moment, Jalen not only defended his dignity, he reclaimed his narrative. His declaration was not a call to violence, but a profound assertion that his past would no longer dictate his future. It was a moment of metamorphosis where the cumulative weight of his suffering transformed into a luminous force of determination and hope. Following this pivotal confrontation, Jalen embarked on a journey of disciplined training and self-transformation. Drawn to the Iron and Grace Martial Arts and Wrestling Center, a modest haven of perseverance and renewal, he immersed himself in rigorous physical training. Under the guidance of Coach Raymond, Jalen learned the art of wrestling and martial arts, disciplines that demanded not only physical strength but also mental fortitude and emotional control. Each grueling session on the mat, each moment of triumph over his own limitations, deepened his understanding that true power comes from within. Through countless hours of practice, he honed not just his body, but his spirit, discovering that the scars of his past could be transformed into badges of honor, symbols of the resilience that defined him. As he transformed physically, Jalen also forged new alliances that reshaped his social world. Friends like Malik and Serena emerged, individuals who, like him, had known hardship and rejection. Together, they built a supportive community, a microcosm of the unity and empathy that Westview Academy had long needed. Their shared struggles and collective strength slowly began to erode the rigid hierarchies and entrenched prejudices that had once dominated the corridors of the school. Through their bonds, Jalen's journey became not only a personal revolution, but also a catalyst for broader change, a movement where every student was encouraged to value self-worth over superficial labels. The climactic confrontation held during Westview's annual Unity Day crystallized everything Jalen had learned. In a symbolic challenge that pitted him against Travis Daniels in a regulated contest of skill and self-control, Jalen's mastery of both body and soul was laid bare for all to see. The match was not about defeating an adversary by force, but about demonstrating the profound transformation that had taken place within him. Every move he executed on that stage was an affirmation of his journey, from a timid new student burdened by a notorious past to a confident, self-assured young man who had reclaimed his narrative. His final words, spoken with heartfelt conviction, resonated through the auditorium. They were a testament to the truth that true victory lies not in overpowering others, but in overcoming one's own limitations. Jalen's story teaches us that every challenge, no matter how insurmountable it may seem, carries within it the potential for profound personal growth. His journey is a powerful reminder that our past do not define us. Rather, it is the strength we gather from our struggles that shapes our destiny. In today's fast-paced, often judgmental world, his experience urges us to look inward, to harness the transformative power of resilience, and to build supportive communities that lift each other up. By turning pain into purpose and adversity into a stepping stone, we can all redefine our paths and create futures that reflect our true potential. As you reflect on Jalen Carter's journey, from the initial isolation at Westview Academy, through the crucible of relentless bullying and personal confrontation, to the eventual triumph of self-mastery, remember that each of us has the capacity to transform our challenges into strengths. Whether you're facing obstacles in your personal life, grappling with external judgments, or striving to overcome a difficult past, let this story serve as a beacon of hope. Embrace your struggles as opportunities for growth, seek out communities that support you, and never allow the shadows of yesterday to obscure the brilliance of your tomorrow. If Jalen's journey has inspired you and reminded you of the power of resilience and self-determination, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support motivates us to continue sharing stories that uplift, inspire, and encourage us all to rise above the challenges we face. Join our community of like-minded individuals who believe in the transformative power of hope, unity, and personal strength. Together, we can create a space where every story matters and every voice is heard. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to sharing more inspiring journeys with you in the future.